News Radio Wham 1180 welcomes you to Ask the Experts. No matter what the topic, we've assembled the most knowledgeable people in Rochester to answer your questions. It's Ask the Experts on News Radio Wham 1180.
I'm Joe Lomonaco. Welcome to the program. It's always nice to have friends. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Joe. How are you?
It's like we see each other like in all sorts of other sort of community events, and now we get to sit down together and actually talk about your agency, which is fabulous. Usually I see Tom O'Connor from the Al Sigl Center at either the Strong Museum at their event or Rochester Hearing and Speech Center at their event, and you see him at all these different events, and I forget that, in all those other community agencies, you are the head of one of the longest serving, I think, and the Al Sigl Center is one of the longest serving community-based organizations in Greater Rochester, isn't it?
It is. It's been over 60 years that we've been in existence, and one of my goals all the time is to be out representing Al Sigl in a positive way, and that means attending a lot of community functions, but also making sure that I'm present at the majority of our member agency events as well. So that's why you see me in different places all the time.
And that's why we see him around all the time. Well, here's what we're going to do today. We are going to talk with Tom about this agency, which has a history that is almost as long as WHAM. WHAM has been on the air for over 100 years, and I believe the Al Sigl Center has a similar history. Have you hit 100 yet? Has the agency hit 100?
Not yet.
Okay.
We are still moving in that direction.
Okay.
We were founded in 1962,
okay,
and we were founded by Justin Vigdor. And Justin and a number of dedicated parents who understood that the idea of bringing together agencies that were scattered all over the community in less than ideal conditions, bringing them together under one roof where they could have shared services, have amenities that wouldn't be available to them in other places, such as a warm water therapy pool, a gymnasium, a cafeteria. The idea was that we would create a fully accessible building, and that these independent agencies would retain their independence, but come together in this facility.
What was the main goal then?
Yeah.
What population of Rochester was meant to be served by the Al Sigl Center when that group said we need to have sort of a warehousing of these services?
Yeah, so the population that was intended to be served at that time were people with disabilities. That was the intention. The agencies that came together at that time were all human service agencies who were in that field.
Okay.
The idea of a fully accessible building for a collection of agencies, human service agencies, to serve people with disabilities was a bit of a renegade idea. Justin would refer to himself as a renegade, and it wasn't widely embraced at the beginning. It was a 6-year planning cycle. They started in 1962, became incorporated as the Monroe County Center for Rehabilitative Agencies, Incorporated. As many would say, that's MACRA, not really a catchy name, right? And then what they did, though, is they continued to found a space that became available on Elmwood Avenue, and they started the idea of building a building that would be fully accessible and would house a number of agencies that would retain their independence but would be able to be collaborative in that space.
I think hearing this part of the story, that may have been one of the reasons why there might have been some hesitancy. You have all these other agencies that were serving parts of that population of people with disabilities within the community, but they didn't want to lose that core identity in saying, yes, we're going to drop that name and come in with something else. I could imagine there would be some hesitancy, but over that time, though, there were really strength in numbers that I would suspect helped this agency really do some robust work right from the jump, and it didn't take time to rebuild anything. It just took time to say we are stronger because we're together.
Absolutely. We acknowledge that we achieve more together, and collaboration is in our DNA. The agencies that came together at that time were all in less than ideal conditions. They moved into a dream house. Mm-hmm. So this is a brand new facility for everybody. It offered amenities that no one else had. And Al Sigl, as the purveyor of that, was able to say, listen, you focus on your mission. If you're CP Rochester, as an example, you focus on helping people with cerebral palsy. You've got a great space to do it in, be able to do therapy, all of those kinds of things. If medical motor service as a transportation company, being able to just focus on their mission of providing safe, reliable transportation, particularly for those who needed it, non-emergency medical transportation, as an example. And so we opened in 1968. street after 6 years of planning, and we opened at 1000 Elmwood Avenue, which most people know as the main, that's the flagship location, right? Mm-hmm. We've grown over the years. We now have 20 buildings on 6 campuses. Wow. And there are services that are, aligned and also complementary in many ways. But when we opened, we were at the tail end. Al Sigl was a broadcaster, much like yourself. He was a Gannett newsman. And he would go on air at noontime around 12:15 every day, weekdays, and he would go on air and he would greet his listeners by saying "Howdy, neighbors." That was his first introduction, and then he would do the Rochester weather. And as we all know, everybody in Rochester is always concerned.
care about weather.
Yes,
it's a big deal to us,
and it's constantly changing, right?
Yes, it is.
So he would then do the weather, and at the time, Rochester had 2 newspapers. This was before television, so at the time we had the Democrat and Chronicle and the Times Union afternoon newspaper. Well, Al, because he worked at the newspaper, had basically a preview to the afternoon edition. So he was doing breaking news before anybody did breaking news. He also had the largest listening audience east of the Mississippi River, again, before television. But what Al was really known for was he had this community spirit where if there was a blood shortage, for instance, during the World War, he would call folks to help, donate blood. I need B positive, blood donors. He had a database that he worked through. He had a special affinity for helping people with special needs. There are stories that he would be walking on Broad Street or Exchange in weather not unlike February now, and somebody didn't have a jacket on, and he would literally take his coat off and give it to them. That was just the kind of man he was. He did not have a voice for radio. There are stories that people would pull over who weren't familiar and say, someone should help that man, get him a glass of water or something, because he did not have, one of those dulcet tones that were known for in the 30s and 40s for being on air. But a very distinctive voice, but more important, a very distinctive spirit. He passed away in 1966. He left a small gift to his church, and the church pastor knew that Justin Vigdor and the folks were working to build this center, and they were involved in a capital campaign. And so the pastor came over and said, look, this is not a huge gift, but it is something that we would like to add to the pursuit of this campaign. So folks around the table, it wasn't a naming gift. This was not that sizable gift, but it was a gift that it reminded everyone that when Al Sigl had passed in 1966, that we had lost this spirit of someone who really looked out for all of the community. And in particular, he had a voice to say to people, please do this. And they responded. He would ask for a wheelchair to be delivered to a home, or help a family that had been displaced by a fire. And they would get it within hours of his broadcast. And so we became the Al Sigl Center.
You took that community spirit then and applied it to an organization which, quite honestly, had a companion community spirit. That's kind of what it was working to do. All the different member agencies were doing it on their own. They're finally able to come together, a 6-year effort to put them together, and then you tie that person's name to it. Somebody who passed prior to the real start of the actual combined foundation. As generations have gone on then, how has the Al Sigl spirit not only continued, but also to remind people of who this guy was and why the center is even named after him in the first place?
Sure. For just like what we're doing now, right? Just being able to remind people, because we're talking about somebody who was, present 100 years ago. But it's almost folklore. And it's hard sometimes for people to believe that there was an individual that existed like this, right? And to tell people, back in the day, we've got photos where he would make public appearances and there would be throngs. I mean, tens of thousands of people around him.
Radio people were celebrities in their time.
Absolutely.
They absolutely were. And it shows you how much they were able to move the needle there and to get the community to rally around those causes, which were not only important, but also, I think, to remind people that It is in those small gestures, giving a coat to someone, providing a chair, a wheelchair if necessary, maybe $1 to somebody or $2, and we're going to talk more about that in just a little bit, is how much of the needle you can move by doing those small combined efforts. And I think now that I'm hearing this story really was sort of, condensed for the very first time, that is, in a broad sense, that's the micro and the macro all sort of coming together, and really what has helped this agency do all of the great work it's done and expand so far into the community over its almost 7 decades now.
Yeah, and you're spot on. It is the ability to include everyone at a level that people are comfortable, and I think that's really the genius of it. And the fact of the matter is, as these agencies came together, they had to set aside ego. They had to be willing to collaborate, but I tell people this is not easy. It's something that's been going on for a long time. But when you start to talk about, how do we share resources? How do we do this in a way that's intelligent, that makes business sense? It makes more sense now than it did when it was formed, frankly.
Tom O'Connor is the president of the Al Sigl Center. He is our guest this week on Ask the Experts. We're up against a break. We're going to take it and come back and talk more with you next on News Radio Wham 1180. Back on Ask the Experts on News Radio Wham 1180, I'm Joe Lomonaco, along with Tom O'Connor, who's the president of the Al Sigl Center. Did you get your blue envelope in the mail in the month of February? I did. Don Alhart and I used to have this bit that we would do on the News Hour, and we would try to challenge each other and the community at large to join us in doing something, like it was always about putting $1 in the envelope. And we said, well, no, can you do 3 this time? Can you do 5? Can you do 7 for every day of the week? Can you put a note in there for the volunteers that open all those envelopes? And it goes back to what we talked about just a moment ago, is the cumulative effect of generosity within a community. And Al Sigl did represent that to this community. He'd give $1 to someone, give a coat to someone. Is that the spirit that continued to carry on to remind this community that gifts and support do not have to be grand in order for an agency like Al Sigl Center to do the work that it does?
That is exactly what Just One is. Just One is a reminder that anyone can participate. When I look at Al Sigl and our history, I think about the number of volunteers and what they've done to help build an army for us of supporters. The Just One campaign has been an introduction to many families for philanthropy. We get notes included in that say, I'm teaching my son or daughter about giving back, and they're using their allowance this week to do that. And I think it's I think it's something that everyone can see the accessibility of. We've been thoughtful about. We ask for just one gift. We don't define what that is. We know that a gift can make an impact, and I don't set a parameter in terms of what our expectations are for that, but we've been amazed at the success of this campaign through the years, 35 years on now.
One thing that Don and I always used to comment on is how this community steps up and how it continues to step up, regardless of the external forces that may be hampering personal budgets for many in this community. So I want to have a little conversation about how what you see as the community's ability and this community's ability to find a way to show their appreciation, support, attaboys with $1 in an envelope or with volunteerism. How robust do you see this community stepping up to the plate?
I don't think there's another community in the country like Rochester, New York. From a philanthropy and a giving back standpoint, I think George Eastman set the tone for this community. And I think, for all of the things that he did to build and make Rochester what it was, a beacon for hope, I believe that this community continues to respond to that. I also think that this community is plugged in. It's a big city in a lot of ways, but it's a small town in others, and people are plugged into the needs of their neighbors. I think when you look at some of the things that happen on a grander scale politically, or the changes that people know are coming, that makes people focus and say, well, that's going to have an impact on some of these other smaller agencies, or this is going to have an impact on that program or these services. And for those that are underserved, I think Rochester has always been mindful of trying to make sure that all of our neighbors are taken care of.
With that in mind, what's the scope of the Al Sigl Center? Like, what's the population that you're serving, not only in the needs that that are being served, but also the numbers of people. And is it Monroe County and all our surrounding counties?
So it's beyond Monroe County because we have a number of member agencies who serve beyond Monroe County as well. I do say the majority of the services that are provided in Monroe and the contiguous counties here. Okay. The dollars that are raised for the Al Sigl Foundation, as an example, all stay here and are given back into those services and to support the work that the member agencies do every day. I would also think about the geography from the standpoint of when we started, 60 plus years ago, we served 3,000 people. We now serve over 55,000.
Whoa.
And the majority of that are people with disabilities and special needs. Now, special needs can be defined in many different ways. Rochester Hearing and Speech Center, as an example, has been an agency from the beginning. They provide early intervention services for kids, but they also provide hearing services till end of life. As an example, many people who will get hearing aids will say, I don't have a disability. Okay. So we're mindful of the fact that that may not be defined as a disability, but it is still a special need. And so that's one of the things that we look at. And then we look at partnerships that we have throughout the community with our IT as an example for effective access technology. And people hear that and they say, well, what is that? And I say, well, if you're at a certain age where you can no longer read fine print on a piece of paper that's not well lit, you may put on a pair of glasses. That's an effective access technology that allows you to do something.
Well. I never realized that my readers had such a highfalutin name.
Exactly. But we've been in a partnership with our IT as an example for better than a decade. And we embed students, engineering students and students of other disciplines in our agencies. And we've created an output for that called the Livability Lab. And the Livability Lab produces products and prototypes that we are trying to then put into the hands of the end users to make their lives more accessible or easier.
Tom O'Connor is the president of the Al Sigl Center. That's what we're talking about on this Ask the Experts. You say one thing and I think of five other things. You talked at the beginning of the show about how the agency was formed and how it was a collection of disparate agencies that you have grown over over your history. You've grown your physical footprint. But the partnerships, and specifically with sort of the colleges and universities, just as an example, because you mentioned it, we have so much resource here that I imagine those partnerships have been critical to the agency being able to thrive year over year, when how technology especially has come into play with how you have to do your jobs day to day.
Absolutely. I'm never lost sight of the fact that we have over 17 colleges and universities within a 70-mile radius. We have a number of volunteers on our board and on our committees that serve as paid professionals at each of these colleges and universities, and they are sharing with us the latest innovations that they're doing. They're sharing their expertise, and it helps our agencies better be positioned for better services for folks. Frankly, these are nonprofits. These are not organizations or agencies. Every agency at Al Sigl is a nonprofit. Okay. They are not operating with surplus revenues. We're not Apple or any of those places where there's a lot of money or resources to do all the things that are needed. So when you look at the partnerships that we can form and the relationships that we have with a number of our donors and volunteers, that's where we can be a force multiplier.
We got a couple of minutes before our next break here, but just sort of in general, how hard does Al Sigl have to hustle for that money? And community generosity will go a great deal, but it doesn't get it all the way there. Are there other funding? Are the partnerships that crucial? Sort of in general, how much work is really going into making sure that you have everything you need to do the services tomorrow?
Sure.
And tomorrow?
That's a great question. I would say that if you think of fundraising and philanthropy in this community, I kind of equate it to kayaking, where you've always got to be paddling, and there's different times where the water will kind of guide you a little bit easier, or sometimes you're going to be in the rapids and you've really got to paddle. But it's every day, so we're hustling every day. I would also say that what we're trying to do is find pathways to support that are more meaningful and that are sustainable for us. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of foundations and grantees that will say this particular program is something, recreation as an example, is something that we want to continue to support. So we'll make sure that we're going after, from a grant writing standpoint, those programs that are recreation and adaptive, making sure that we're serving the audiences that we do. But yeah, you we go after it every day. Yeah. And a number of our agencies are funded through New York State. There's some that are funded through federal programs as well. When you have changes in administration, when you have changes in laws and rules, all those things can be factors. And so our agency directors are also hustling every day.
Tom O'Connor's the biggest hustler of them all. He's the president of the Al Sigl Center, and they are our guests here on Ask the Experts. We got to take a another break, and we will come back and start the second half of our program next here on News Radio Wham 1180. Welcome back to the second half of Ask the Experts on News Radio Wham 1180. I'm Joe Lomonaco. Tom O'Connor is my guest, the president of the Al Sigl Center. You probably parked there when you went to the Lilac Festival because they are neighbors of the Lilac Festival in Highland Park, and that's where they've been. That's the main building in campus that has been around since the beginning, right? Or mostly since the beginning.
Yeah, that was the dream house that was built and opened in 1968. It actually took longer than 1 year to open, but yes, that was the first iteration of a fully accessible campus. We now have 6 campuses. We have 20 buildings. We have more than 20 different independent agencies who are all providing services.
Okay, so that's the center of the spider web. So we're going to talk about the spider web here. And I want to talk about that building as sort of being the nerve center. Or I guess maybe is that the facilitation hub that allows the network that is the Al Sigl Center and Al Sigl member agencies. We want to kind of take you a little bit behind the curtain here to show you how it's made. The community does great support. The universities can provide some great technological and intellectual support, but it is about the daily administration of how that all works, because you have many campuses, you have many member agencies. So give us a little bit of a walkthrough about how it actually goes day to day for you guys.
Sure. So operationally, Al Sigl is the space provider. So we provide the facilities and the shared services. We have an IT company. We have a future care planning partnership. We have a number of joint ventures that we're involved in. The Golisano Autism Center, as an example. So we have a number of roles that we play in terms of being a shared service, being a facility provider. We provide unique spaces for education and therapy, warm water therapy pools, etc. The agencies, member agencies in particular, provide the services every day. So they're the ones who are actually doing, the OT and the PT. They may be teaching people how to drive again after a stroke or an accident or something like that. The education services are all provided by our member agencies and affiliates as well. And then we have folks that we call neighbors, and those are folks who take advantage of the infrastructure. The key thing that I like to differentiate is Al Sigl, as a provider, a space provider, we also have a foundation. And so we raise funds to support the efforts of our member agencies so they can focus more on their mission. So, some folks will say, well, this sounds like, a kind of a different way to approach a landlord-tenant relationship. And the hairs on the back of my neck stand up just a little bit because I'll say, well, I know a lot of really great real estate developers and landlords. Most of them don't give funds back to their tenants. So that's the difference when you think about Al Sigl, is that the foundation actually provides support back to our member agencies. And I'll give you one specific example. The MS Society, as an example, has received over $1 million in funding from the Al Sigl Foundation. We were recognized by them nationally in Dallas a couple of years ago for that generosity, which I don't take for granted. It comes to us because the community supports what we do in this unique model. But it does say to people that here's an agency who provides services every day for a group that needs it, and have basically been able to do it in an environment that becomes almost rent-free because we've given back to them more than they've provided in revenue back for the space that they lease.
Is the Al Sigl Center then a business model as well as a service provider agency?
It is absolutely a business model. I'm on a national and an international board for what are called social purpose real estate networks, and we are recognized as the oldest and the one that is most mission aligned, having been in business for over 60 years. The business model as it exists today works even more than what it was envisioned in the mid-60s.
There's so many things that have happened in this community that have spread nationwide or globally. It seems that I don't know what it is about this place, and maybe it's just because I'm here and I know the stories and I've seen how others have taken what has happened in this community and tried to replicate it or or used people here as resources to say, how can we build something? But we seem to have a knack for that, don't we? Combining the best of business acumen with the community service and creating an entity then which is replicatable or can be replicatable in many other places.
Absolutely. I think that's, when you think of, let's use Tom Golisano as an example, right? Tom Golisano is a gentleman who understands how the globe works. And I think he is somebody who said, we have a unique model in Rochester with all of these nonprofits. And he recognizes that, they don't exist in other places. When he moved to Southwest Florida, they're not there. And he's been making an investment in the resources there. As a matter of fact, I'm heading to Florida shortly to go talk to an organization about how we do collaboration in upstate New York, because they don't do it the way we do it.
And is it because they don't realize that they can still retain their autonomy and get the benefits of collectiveness? Are there still people that want to hold on to that silo and say, no, you're not going to take this away. We do it, and no one else can help us do it?
I think there's you have to have a level of trust. Right, you have to trust that your partners are in it for the right reasons. I'm reminded often of the Quincy Jones sign on the door for "We Are the World." Leave your ego at the door. I think that's another component of this. In order to have success, you've got to be able to be aligned with mission. You've got to be aligned that this is a model that works, but you've got to be willing to put in the work.
Tom O'Connor is the president of the Al Sigl Center. He is our guest here on Ask the Experts. Again, when you say something, it puts up three questions in my head. You mentioned that Golisano and the Autism Center is now a part of what the Al Sigl work is. And I imagine that over the 6+ decades of work, that the scope of those agencies and what have the services that have had to be provided have changed, altered, new things come in. We weren't talking about autism in the 70s or in the 60s, okay? So that had to come in. So is the Al Sigl and the model that it has adaptable enough to say, look, we have the infrastructure, we can add new things in and bring new professionals to bear so that we can really just pump this into our network, and that's already established, and now we're ready to hit the ground running with something that is new-ish, like autism as an example?
Yes, within our DNA is flexibility. And we've always said, we're small enough as an organization, and I know some people say, well, you're one of the larger nonprofits in Rochester. But, if you look at us from a global standpoint, we're one of the smaller, nonprofits but as a collaborative, that's where we really gain, our impact. The ability to pivot when needed and recognize when things are, when you're starting to get data points, when you're starting to understand that this is becoming a larger issue than people were aware of, and autism is a great example of that. I don't know if it's, if it's environmental. I don't know if it's something that's come about as just our awareness has been raised. But certainly as we started to investigate the possibility of building an autism center, we saw that the data had gone from, 1 in 50 to down to 1 in 35 were experiencing or being diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. And the numbers were growing. And what we were hearing from the community was there's not a place that is a one-stop shop for this type of service. And because we had experience with, bringing agencies together and having the infrastructure, it just made sense for us to then say, well, let's pursue this. So a team of us went all over the Northeast looking for an example of, an autism center that was in existence. There were a couple of things that were close, but not quite. And then we said, all right, we've got what we want. We were fortunate enough to go to Tom Golisano and the Golisano Foundation and get the initial support for it. And then the community stepped up to really help us to develop it from that standpoint.
All goes back to how generous this community can be when they understand that there's a need. And I think they also understand that if it sort of goes back to Justin's idea of if we don't do it, who will? Right. And I knew Justin in his lifetime, and he passed very recently, but the legacy that he left behind was just that. If you see it, make it, go do it, because relying on others to provide the service or government to provide the service, certainly that can do, but it could be behind the curve. It could be not exactly what you want. If you're in it, and I think that's one of the great things about how Al Sigl has worked in its history, is that it comes from the inside out. It comes from those who need the services and who understand what the benefits can be and how to best serve the population, because that makes the most sense completely.
Sure. It's more organic, it's natural. And one of the things that I loved about Justin Vigdor was that he didn't have a vision for this because he had a loved one with a disability. He knew it was the right thing to do, and he pursued it relentlessly. He was what people don't appreciate or understand about Justin Vigdor, but as a practicing attorney, he went to his office in his 90s, dressed for work, and he attended most of our meetings. He was in person and present, and always a visionary. But one of the things that I think is most important is it's one thing to have a vision, it's another thing to have the implementation. And there are many people who have great vision, but you have to have a team and a dedicated army of folks who will help you implement. And I think that's been one of the benefits at Al Sigl. We've had a dedicated army.
Tom Connor is the president of the Al Sigl Center. He is leading that charge over at their main campus. You know where it is. It's right next to Highland Park. You probably see it, and we're giving you an idea of what's been happening on the inside in case you've never needed the services of the Al Sigl Center. But perhaps you have supported them in some way by dropping $1 in a blue envelope that came into your mailbox, or by attending any type of fundraiser for any one of their member agencies. They do have quite an amazing reach. We're going to take our final break, come back and wrap things up on this edition of Ask the Experts next on News Radio Wham 1180. Back to wrap things up on this Ask the Experts with Tom O'Connor, the president of the Al Sigl Center. And they are always in need of not only your contributions, but they're also in just know what's going on. alsigl.org is an easy way to do it, because that not only can you learn about the agency, the parent agency, but all of those that fall underneath it. And they can also get a really easy resource into what all of your agencies are doing. Throughout the entire year, there are events and things that will shine a light on a portion of what the Al Sigl's mission is. So maybe it's something that is important to you, and you can benefit the entire group by coming into, like, I'm just going to come in and peel this side of the onion and coming in. The calendar, I would suspect, is just full of stuff.
Yeah, the calendar's jammed, and it's a great position to be in, to have so many different events to showcase the different services and the opportunities that are provided. And whether you're interested in recreation, whether if you want to ski, if you want to play pickleball, tennis, golf. If you like fine wine and fine foods, we do a fine tastings event in September. We do a walkabout at Eastview Mall that's indoors in October.
Walkabout is a great event, by the way. If you've never done it, people come in costume.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fun. You see families do it. Even if you just go to People Watch, it is a phenomenal event. And not only can you see the people that are impacted by these agencies because they do participate, but you can see the scope of how people have gravitated towards and wanted to be a part of what this agency's mission is.
My favorite part about Walkabout are the families who come dressed completely in some theme all together. And many times there'll be a child who's in a wheelchair, and they'll decorate the wheelchair as a rocket ship or a cruise ship or something. And they're all the cruise ship directors. But it really is. It's a fun. It's one of those events where everybody feels welcome and they're included. And it's indoors, so it's we don't have the weather element. But there are so many other ways too at Al Sigl and our member agencies. If you're interested in volunteering, all of our member agencies can always use volunteers. Folks that are involved in committees and boards, that's volunteer work. And sometimes we'll talk about what kind of skill sets do you need around the table. You need expertise in legal, you need expertise in finance, you need expertise in people who understand what's happening in healthcare, as an example, because as well as our member agency leaders are plugged in, they've got limited capacity as well. And so when we recruit board members and committee members, it helps us stay innovative. It helps us stay ahead of some of the changing trends that are happening throughout the country. And in the case of Al Sigl as an example, we didn't have a playbook. So we've been making this up as we go, and we've been doing we've been pretty good at it as we've gone. But it always helps to have people who are in the know around the table to say, hey, these are some of the changing trends, and you need to be plugged into it.
oftentimes what you have in your pocket is not nearly as valuable as what you have in your brain and your heart. And that can certainly be the thing that agency is in desperate need of. If you have that level of expertise, you might think, oh, this is just something I do. But it can serve a greater need, and you can feel really good about it and meet some wonderful people while you're doing it. Speaking of which, while we have a few minutes left here to talk, I do want to look at the future. We've been talking a lot about the history of this agency, how it has grown, how it has become a model for others. But there's always going to be what's the next thing. You know, agencies like yours didn't see COVID coming and the challenges that happened, and how so many had to pivot and use new technology and try to deliver services when being in person was not something that could be done. We don't know what the next thing is over the horizon. How, I guess, fundamentally, does an agency like the Al Sigl and Center and the member agencies sort of prepare for the unknown?
So one of the things that we do, many of our leaders attend conferences. We're plugged into, higher ed, and we're paying attention to what's happening on a national level for, just trends. I mean, if you look at what happened with COVID and the isolation that occurred as a result, and then the challenge within education afterwards, we've talked about the mental health challenges of what, coming out of the pandemic, what it was during and what it is coming out of. And we know that generationally speaking, we've got, a young group of folks that are in need of real help. And so when you look at what's on the horizon, I think more mental health services. There are, to be able to anticipate. We are in a position where Al Sigl, we're almost 100% occupied on over 650,000 square feet of real estate.
Wow.
So it's a good problem to have, but it also forces us to talk about we've got to be able to develop new real estate and be ready for the next things. And that's the charge that I have in front of me now.
Is to balance also, the need for expansion, but also not overdoing it and not underdoing it. What a fine line you've got to walk when it comes to that, to know, like, okay, well, how far do we go and where do we put the resources? You could have 5 things in front of you on your horizon. How do you make the choices?
In a lot of cases, it's to respond to what the immediate need is, and then understand. I'm a pretty pragmatic leader, so I look at things and say, listen, if what we really need is an expansion of some existing services, then let's just do that. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think we're going to continue to see a growth in autism services and needs for that. So more than likely, what was a 36,000 square foot facility may have to grow. Okay. When we look at mental health services, we've got a pediatric behavioral health program that's a partnership with the U of R. That building is nearly fully occupied. We built it with the flexibility to go up another level if needed, and we've got some land near it that we could also, expand it if that's what's required. But it's being plugged in and understanding how can we respond to this in the most effective and efficient way, business-wise.
Exactly, and also know that you'll have to make some decisions to provide services now while the building's being built. You can't just pop something up in a matter of days. It is long-range planning, but the services are needed in the here and now.
Yes.
So it's being able to say, okay, we're not going to sacrifice anything while we wait, because waiting is always part of the game.
Yes, absolutely. We have professionals in place to provide those services, and we can add resources to that. We also can build a vision for we need an expanded place for them to work, and that's what Al Sigl's. That's really the elasticity of Al Sigl has been about throughout our history. We've grown as a result of the needs of our member agencies and the services that they're providing. We haven't grown just because we've needed to do more real estate.
Yeah, and you've also grown because of the generosity of this community in no small part, and also as the community has changed over the last 6+ decades, there are services that have needed to come in. There's maybe some that have fallen by the wayside over time. It's a constant. It's a living entity. A service organization, like anything, is a living entity, and you have to treat it as such and be able to nurture it and know that there are going to be parts that are going to stay and parts that are going to need to get bigger as time goes on.
Sure, and being able to communicate with the community and say, we appreciate and need your care and feeding. We are growing. We've got to continue to do that. We also face tough challenges, and we know that there are some programs that are funded in different places that maybe the funding won't continue for a period of time. You pivot and think about how you'll do it differently.
Last 2 minutes here with Tom O'Connor, the president of the Al Sigl Center. When did you get into this?
I got into this in 2008 as a volunteer.
Okay.
I worked in corporate for 16 years, and then I started as a volunteer.
What do you think is the thing, or is there something that you can look at now in your rearview mirror that say, like, that hooked me from a volunteer to now running the organization?
Yeah, it was the business model and the mission. You know, the idea of this really effective business model that helped people with disabilities. I wasn't aware of anything else like it in the country. And as I've been in the role, particularly in the last 10 years now, I'm still learning every day.
10
I'm still
years?
challenged. Yeah, I think
at the top of the agency?
Yeah.
My gosh, really?
I know, time flies, doesn't it?
Good Lord. I tell you what, time keeps moving and we just stay exactly the same. But at the end of the day, though, I imagine it's one of those things where it's entrepreneurially and community service. I imagine for you kind of go hand in hand, and you see how one feeds the other and continues to give you that little ember that you can keep stoking every day when you get back into the office.
Every day every day is a challenge. Every day is a visionary challenge, and every day I'm surrounded by people who are committed to doing fantastic work.
To express your generosity, to find out about volunteer opportunities, or just to know what events are coming up, go to Sigl, SIGL.org, and you will find it all there. Tom O'Connor, their president. It's been good to really talk to you about your part of the business. Maybe we can do this again because we have so much more that we didn't really talk about, but thank you for sharing some of the Al Sigl story.
Thanks for being so generous with the time.
I'm Joe Lomonaco. Thanks for spending time with us, and we will catch up with you again on another Ask the Experts on News Radio WHAM 1180.